Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 129, The Galligan Brothers. 4 brothers from Goodna, Queensland enlisted in World War I. Only 2 came home. This is their story. The 4 brothers were John Bennett Galligan, Isidore Vincent Galligan, Michael Galvin Galligan and Edward Andrew Galligan. On the 2nd of September 1916, mentions how their father James Galligan of Goodna, a retired government servant, has recently received word that his 3 sons, all of whom are at the front somewhere, are in good health. Trooper John Galligan, who was in the Boer War, is in the Light Horse in Egypt. Private E. Galligan is with the infantry in France, and Gunner Edmund Galligan is with the artillery. A 4th son, Private M. Galligan, is now at Enoggera. These soldiers are the brothers of Mr. Robert Galligan of the Railway Workshops, North Ipswich. On the 4th of August 1917, there was a personal note in the paper. The family of Mr. and Mrs. James Galligan of Goodna has a sad but glorious war record. 4 sons enlisted. Trooper John Bennett Galligan of the Light Horse had served in the Boer War for 5 months and was early in the ranks raised for this war. He was for over 19 months in Egypt and was eventually killed in action in Palestine on the 26th of March 1917. Private Isidore Vincent Galligan left Brisbane on the 31st of December 1915 and was killed in action in France on September the 4th, 1916. Driver Edmund Andrew Galligan from the Howitzer Battery left Brisbane on the 2nd of April 1916 and in June was wounded in France. He received a severe gunshot wound in the head. Private Michael Galvin Galligan left Brisbane on the 27th of October 1916 and is still with the AIF. The boys were from a family of 12 children born to John Patrick Galligan and Mary Ann Sullivan. John Galligan was Irish. At the age of 22, he joined the Royal Irish Constabulary in 1864 and he emigrated to Australia by 1872. Mary Ann Sullivan came to Victoria with her parents and her younger sister when she was 2 from Carey Island. Her father was a blacksmith and the family settled in South Geelong in Victoria. John and Mary married in Queensland in 1872 and John worked as a contractor. Their children, the firstborn child was Edwin Herbert Galligan and he was born on the 4th of February 1873 in Maryborough, Queensland. On the 5th of May 1926, it mentions, for having failed to furnish income tax returns, the following were fined, and Edwin Herbert Galligan is listed as a dairy farmer from Pyramon, North Queensland. On the 13th of July 1927, another article stating pay your tax to avoid this fate from Brisbane, the following convictions were secured by the Commissioner for Taxation in Brisbane for failure to furnish income tax returns and information. Edwin Herbert Galligan, Carpentaria Downs, Vias Ennersley, bookkeeper, fined £3 and 3 shillings 6 costs. And Edwin died in Goodna on the 15th of August 1949 at the age of 76. The second child was John Bennett Galligan, and he was born on the 22nd of August 1874 at Maryborough, Queensland, and as mentioned he served in the Boer War. He enlisted on the 1st of October 1899 as part of the 4th Queensland Imperial Bushman Contingent, incorrectly listed as John Joseph Gallahan. He embarked on the Manchester port on the 18th of May 1900, arriving at Beera on the 14th of June 1900, and he was discharged on the 10th of August 1901, embarking on the Britannic and arrived in Brisbane on the 5th of August 1901, where his contingent disbanded on their return. He enlisted in World War I on the 18th of January 1915 in the 5th Light Horse Regiment at Toowoomba in Queensland. He was an electrician at the time of his enlistment. He embarked on the Corolla from Brisbane on the 12th of June 1915, and he was killed in action at Palestine on the 26th of March 1917 at the age of 42, and he has no known grave. On the 21st of April 1917, it was reported in the paper that Mr. J. Galligan of Goodna was notified on Friday that his son, Private John Galligan, had been killed in France. Private Galligan was one of 4 brothers who enlisted in the defence of the Empire and had seen active service both in Egypt and France. The deepest sympathy has been expressed at Goodna for Mr. Galligan and family, as this news comes on top of the word received some time ago that another son, Private I. Galligan, has been reported wounded and missing, and for whom considerable anxiety has been felt. Mr. James Galligan has received from Mr. F. Newton a letter giving him particulars of the death of his son, Trooper J. H. Galligan. Major Newton was his squadron leader and saw the gallant fellow fall. The squadron was out about 2 miles north of the Gaza at the time and was galloping forward under heavy fire from the Turks. Trooper Galligan was shot through the lower portion of the body. He raised himself on one arm, and when the stretcher bearers approached some minutes later, he was still alive and tried to speak, but was unable to make himself understood. They did what they could for him, giving him water, the Major wrote, but he died without being moved. It was undoubtedly the best way to die, if one has to, and a way that all his relatives have reason to be proud of. The third child, James Patrick Galligan, was born on the 21st of February 1876 in Maryborough, Queensland, and in the Queensland Times, Ipswich Herald and General Advertiser on the 25th of October 1902, there is an article from the Goodna Police Court. 2 asylum attendants charged with intent to steal. At the Goodna Police Court yesterday, 2 young men named James Conahan and James Patrick Galligan, attendants at the asylum for the insane at Goodna, were charged that on the 26th of September they did sever and make movable certain vegetables, the property of J.B. Hogg, the medical superintendent, with intent to steal the same. So it seems quite a lengthy and detailed court case for some vegetables missing out of a vegetable garden. And it did say the case was adjourned for 8 days and it would proceed next Wednesday, but I was unable to find any further information. So based on the level of crime, quite possibly it was thrown out of court. In January 1908, it announces the wedding of Mr. J.P. Galligan, the son of J. Galligan of Goodna, to Miss Julia Ryan, the daughter of M. Ryan. And it says a quiet but interesting wedding was solemnised at St Mary's Church, Ipswich. And then on the 18th of April 1849, it mentions the death of James Patrick Galligan, late of Goodna, and it stated that he had a will that was dated on the 18th of April 1943. On the 12th of August 1952, there was an article titled Prohibition Order Granted. In the Court of Petty Sessions yesterday, an elderly widow successfully applied for a prohibition order to be issued against her 40-year-old invalid pensioner's son, James Patrick Galligan. Galligan failed to appear and permission was granted by the magistrate to hear the application. So this is James. Julia Galligan stated that her son, who was unmarried, resided with her at Railway Street, Goodna, and that his health had suffered as a result of heavy drinking. He had a prohibition order made against him 12 months ago, and the application was granted. The fourth child, Anne Mary Agnes Galligan, was born on the 25th of September 1878. She married Andrew Josie in Ipswich on the 9th of September 1902. And Andrew was a warder working at the asylum. Anne died on the 23rd of November 1913 at Goodna, aged only 35. The fifth child, Francis Stephen Galligan, was born on the 10th of September 1880 and he died aged only 16 months on the 22nd of January 1882. The sixth child was Mary Catherine Galligan. She was born on the 21st of February 1883. She married Henry Edward Cooney on the 30th of December 1903. Henry Edward Cooney was a clerk at the Goodna Asylum and he was appointed in 1900. In September 1909, Henry Edward Cooney was listed as a land agent that was appointed as a clerk of petty sessions at the Charleville district. They lived at Mackay, and then in 1913, Henry Edward Cooney, clerk of petty sessions at Mackay, has been appointed as a deputy land commissioner for the Mackay district. 2 years later, he was acting police magistrate at Townsville, and he'd been appointed to be acting visiting justice to His Majesty's penal settlement at Stewart's Creek, Townsville, during the absence of the visiting justice. They had no children, and Mary died on the 17th of May 1950 at the age of 67. The seventh child was Robert Francis, and he was born on the 21st of February 1883. He married Agnes Morn McCanellan in Ipswich in 1912. He was a clerk and they lived in Ipswich. In 1919, Robert Galligan is listed as living at Ipswich and he was a railway official. Agnes died in 1924 and Robert went on to marry Lucy McCamey in Brisbane in 1926. In September 1945, it says that Robert Francis Galligan, 62, said he was married and lived in Quarry Street, Ipswich. And on July the 25th, he left his workshop at the railways at 5 p.m, and the article title says "Struck on Nose." Robert died in October 1952 at the age of 69. The eighth child, Patrick Joseph Galligan, was born in Goodna on the 9th of March 1885. He married Annie Mabel Burrows in 1909. They lived at Goodna on a property called Brickfield Hill, and he was an iron moulder. He died in 1964 at the age of 79. Their son, Francis John Goodwin, enlisted in World War II in August 1940. He was discharged on the 1st of May 1945 and he was based at Cape York and Townsville. He was a brickmaker in the supply depot. The ninth child, Isidore Vincent Galligan, was born at Goodna on the 4th of April 1887. In 1913, he was living at Goodna and working as a grocer. He enlisted in World War I on the 18th of September 1915 in Brisbane. He was placed in the 9th Infantry Battalion and he embarked on the 30th of December 1915 from Brisbane on the Itonis. He was killed in action in France on the 4th of September 1916 at the age of 29. And in May 1917, it says Mr. J. Galligan of Goodna has been notified that his second son, Private Isidore Vincent Galligan, who was reported wounded and missing, was killed in France. This is the second member of the family who's given his life to the defence of the Empire. And in his war records, there was a letter from T. Stevenson from the 49th Battalion from France on the 20th of April 1917. I am a bosom pal of the late I.W. Galligan, and I thought it best to answer on behalf of S.B. Smith, who says that I.V. Galligan was seriously wounded on the 3rd of September 1916, and he died on his way to the hospital as some of the stretcher bearers were carrying him. The best description I can give him is as follows: 5'8.5" height, hair brown, complexion rather fresh with square chin and rather large nose. He had very few teeth and was not too strong at the time of his death. He was inclined to be a little bow-legged. P.S. I might have already seen the deceased brother, and I also wrote to his mother. The 10th child was Ellen Margaret Galligan. She was born at Goodna on the 5th of June 1889. She did not marry and died at Sandgate, Queensland on the 21st of February 1971 at the age of 81. The 11th child, Edmund Andrew Galligan, was born on the 6th of January 1882. Edmund enlisted on the 8th of October 1915. He was a mental health attendant at the time of his enlistment. He joined the 5th Light Horse Regiment, 16th Reinforcements, and embarked from Sydney on the Mashobra on the 5th of April 1916. On the 12th of July 1917, it stated, "The friends of Private Edmund Galligan of Goodna have been notified he has been wounded in France. Already 2 of his brothers have made the supreme sacrifice. Another one is in the ranks." And in brackets it says the 4 soldiers referred to are brothers of Mr. Robert Galligan of the North Ipswich Railway Workshops. On the 6th of December 1917, there's an article titled Private Edmund Galligan. Mr. James Galligan Goodna has been advised by the military authorities that his son, driver Edmund Galligan, is returning to Australia. It will be remembered that driver Galligan is one of the 4 members of the family who enlisted in the AIF. He was severely wounded in the Great Battle of June last in France. Edmund returned to Australia on the 9th of October 1917 and he was working as a grocer in Goodna in 1928. And in November 1934 it announces the death of Edmund, death of caretaker. A caretaker, Edmund Andrew Galligan, 42, single, of the Goodna Mental Hospital, collapsed while holidaying at Margate on the 18th of October and died in hospital that afternoon. The inquest was held and his sister told the coroner that there had been a serious delay in holding the post-mortem so that her brother was not buried until dusk the following afternoon. The coroner stated that no report of death was made until 1:45 p.m. on the 19th of October. Remarking on the delay that had been caused, occasioning distress and inconvenience to the relatives, he ordered an adjournment with a view of having the matter cleared up. And there was an obituary in the paper on the 5th of November 1934 on Edmund. The death occurred at the General Hospital, Brisbane, of Mr. Edmund Andrew Galligan of Goodna. He was 42, of the late Mr. and Mrs. James Galligan, well-known residents of Goodna. He was educated at the Goodna State School and the Christian Brothers College, Ipswich. Joining the AIF, he left Queensland with the 110th Howitzer Battery and was discharged unfit after 2.5 years' service. At the time of his death, he was employed at the Goodna Mental Hospital. He's survived by his 2 sisters, Mrs. Cooney from Gin and Miss Lily Galligan from Goodna, and 5 brothers, Edwin, James, Robert, Patrick and Michael. 2 brothers were killed whilst on active service. And on the 2nd of November 1934, it was announced that his death was from cerebral hemorrhage, so a stroke. And it said that he was on annual holidays and was accompanied by his eldest brother, Edwin, who was a book and storekeeper from Lyndhurst Station via Annesley, North Queensland, and that he has sister, Miss Ellie Galligan of Goodna, who was at Sutton's Beach, Redcliffe. He was at Sutton's Beach, Redcliffe, when he took suddenly ill. Dr. Brockway was called in and ordered his removal to the Brisbane General Hospital, and shortly after being admitted, he passed away. It stated that he was born at Goodna on the 6th of January 1892, was unmarried and 42. Said he was a general favourite amongst all of his associates and those who he came into contact. The 12th child was Michael Galligan, who was born at Goodna on the 16th of January 1894. He enlisted in World War I on the 27th of October 1916 in the 9th Infantry Battalion. He was a horsebreaker at the time of his enlistment. Michael embarked from Brisbane on the marathon, and he returned to Australia on the 30th of January 1917, medically unfit. He married Elizabeth May Wood on the 9th of July 1919 in Toowoomba, and they lived at Goodna. In 1925, Michael was living in Mackay, but Eliza was not listed. They had a son and daughter. On the 22nd of November 1934, it was announced in the newspaper article, Cook's bankruptcy, not paid for meals. Having started in 1932 with £5 as capital as a contract cook at a timber camp at Bunya Mountains, Michael Galligan of Bowen Hills today appeared in the bankruptcy court, showing liabilities of £128, 18 shillings and 3 pence against assets of £1, 8 shillings and 6 pence. Galligan said that he attributed his bankruptcy to the inability to secure payment for the meals he supplied. Galligan explained that his liabilities were incurred when he supplied meals to the employees of Newton and Gracie sawmillers. The practice was for the firm to collect the meal money from their hands and pay it to the bankrupt by cheque. These payments were made monthly. The bankrupt's liability was contracted only in the last few months. Newton and Gracie got into difficulties and could not pay their employees. In consequence, the money due to the bankrupt was not paid. The total amount owing to the bankrupt was £516 and 10 shillings. Newton and Gracie had undertaken liability for £282 of this total, but the firm has since gone out of business and the bankrupt could not collect. Galligan, at this present time, was working as a temporary cook at Dunwich. Michael enlisted in World War II in March 1942, and he was living at Dunwich at the time, and in 1954 they were living in Brisbane and Michael was also working as a cook there. So their parents were James. There was an article related to him on his death on the 15th of August 1919, and it said Mr. James Galligan, a very old resident of the Goodna district, died rather unexpectedly on Wednesday. The late Mr. Galligan was born in Limerick, Ireland. He had 53 years in Queensland. For 10 years he was the member of the police force, subsequently joining the staff of the mental hospital at Goodna, where he held a position of head attendant for over 30 years when he retired. He's survived by his widow, 2 daughters, Mrs. Cooney of Townsville and Miss Eileen Galligan Goodna, and 3 sons, Edmund, Michael and R.F. Galligan. The 2 former have only recently returned from active service, and 2 other sons made the supreme sacrifice. And their mother, Mary, she died on the 18th of September 1928. It says Mrs. Mary Ann Galligan, Senior of Goodna, relict of the late Mr. James Galligan, died last night at the age of 74. She was a very old resident of Goodna. Her husband died 9 years ago and she leaves a family of 6 sons. Edwin James Robert C., who is the member of the official staff at the North Ipswich Railway Workshops, Patrick Edmund and Michael Galligan, and 2 daughters, Mrs H. Cooney and Miss E. Galligan. So you can certainly say that the Galligan family did their bit for the war effort with the Boer War, the World War I, and also the next generation in World War II.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.